I originally kind of went with the idea of any sort of non-normative sexual behavior or way of relating to your body and the bodies of others. I think it's a very interrelational force in that it kind of forces you to ask things about what pleasure means to you, receiving pleasure, giving pleasure, desiring, being desired. Um, and so, things that go beyond what are socially sanctioned.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, an arts and culture podcast. Thank you for listening. I want to just remind you all that if you're not following us on social media, please do. It's always nice to interact with you all, and I'm always posting clips from the podcast, information about our free book club that's on Zoom, and all other kinds of exciting events, and a lot of literary posts. So Instagram is at Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and so is our Facebook. We have a LinkedIn, a YouTube channel where you might be watching us now. So, hi, there's a video episode on YouTube. And our TikTok is actually my name. It's at Dr. Rimby. And Patreon is where you can find all the just uncensored, no ad episodes. It's patreon.com/, Ivory Tower Boiler Room. There's usually some kind of deal going on, and you can try it out for a few days for free if you just want to see what gets posted there. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. It means a lot. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure you're following us. And I hope you all just enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room with Dr. Andrew Rimby. Really excited because I'm joined with the Gay and Lesbian Review's managing editor, Jeremy C. Fox, again. Welcome back, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me again, Andrew. Good to see you.
Yeah, so we're kind of departing a little from queer ethnographies into a little more of a salacious territory. I have to admit, a territory I'm a little more titillated by. So this is all about kink. It's the kink issue. Just in
You could
time.
argue that this is an ethnographic exploration of the kink community.
Yeah, and of the body. Uh, but nicely timed with Valentine's. So, what I really love is we're joined here with two of the writers, Casper Byrne and Sergio Interdonato. So welcome to the podcast. Um, Really eager to hear about, you know, what first got you interested in even writing for a kink themed issue. Like, Casper, if you want to start, is this like something, is kink a part of your daily practice, your academic practices?
Gosh, well, I did write about kind of growing up online in kinky spaces, and so I think that for me, kink has really always been a part of my life, even if I couldn't name it as such. I would guess that I'm the youngest person in this call, possibly by quite a lot. Don't know that for sure, but most of my life has been defined by being in online spaces or needing to kind of look at things from afar, be it because I was too young or, spending my early 20s in COVID lockdown. And so kind of kink as a more effusive practice, I think, has been a part of my just day to day, but maybe not in the sense that many people would understand kink, maybe historically or at present. But yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to like definitely pick your brain about all the different apps and what's going on those online spaces. And then Sergio, same question, is this something you've been playing around with in your mind for a while?
Yeah, it comes from my perspective, from a personal point of view and experience, because I've written about the food kink and the food fetish, and that really came from a personal space that I wanted to get deeper into it, and it was also somehow therapeutical because it helped me realize the wider context for the fetish. Yeah, I come from studies in visual culture, and I wanted to really starting from there and then expand into a lot of more kinks, maybe even ones that I'm not invested in. But I wanted to apply my visual culture background to a personal experience, yeah, to make sense of it also somehow.
Yeah, so with Casper, we have, Tumblr as a gateway to kink, and Sergio, we have the power of the foot. So definitely very interesting. I mean, I think they blur together in certain parts. I was talking to Jeremy when I knew like what you each had written about, just like the way that celebrities' feet are ranked and like how feet, OnlyFans has like really marketed the foot fetish. But like Jeremy, because you've seen their articles, you've seen things about cruising, Maplethorpe, there's a piece about, sacred dungeon type practices, BDSM, gets involved in the mix. Like, what was it like to even put all of these pieces together? Were you worried about like the lines that were going to be crossed, or you kind of like knew the territory where this was heading?
We the Gay and Lesbian Review has a mature readership. It's not something that's distributed like highlights for children. And we have always been pretty frank about sexual matters, I think. This is the first time we've done an issue that was specifically focused on kink, but it's certainly something we've touched upon before. I mean, there's an article on Robert Mapplethorpe in here, and inevitably he's one of the queer artists who we've written about many times in the past. And that's a piece that could have gone into any issue of the magazine. It wouldn't have to be kink focused. And I think what's great about the pieces that Casper, Sergio, and the other contributors to this issue, what's great about what they did is they really explain where different fetishes and different ideas about sex and different sexual identities are coming from, and provide a context. I mean, when Sergio first reached out with his rough draft of the piece that we wound up publishing, I was really impressed that he was able to point to these classical art examples of how feet were portrayed and why there was an eroticism of the foot. I've known people who share that. I personally, the feet are not really my thing, but he makes a persuasive argument. He shows you how a foot can symbolize a lot more than just what we have to get walking around. And he really provides a lot of smart, thoughtful examples of why this is erotic, how it's erotic, and how you can read a lot more into a foot than just a foot. And then with Casper, he pitched this idea, and it's another world that's not part of my world. As he pointed out, he's younger than most of us. Sergio's pretty young too, but I am not. I'm a middle-aged guy, and I really didn't partake in Tumblr. And the 2010s were certainly not formative years for me. I was in my 30s when they began, and in my 40s when they ended. So he demonstrates a whole new world to me, and I think probably to a lot of our readers, because many of our readers are my age or older. This is, I experienced some of what he's talking about in his article in the 90s on like Usenet, when there were spaces in there where people would share fan fiction, and part of the Tumblr thing certainly was fan fiction. So I can kind of relate. I kind of get it, but back then, this was in the days of like green text on a black screen on
Hmm.
your computer. This was not, lavishly illustrated and videos and all kinds of interactive elements. This was very, very bare bones. And so it was fascinating to see and to realize, how far this had all come since I was having these sorts of experience online 15 or 20 years earlier. So I think hopefully this issue um, will be satisfying to people who share these experiences and share these interests. But also, if this isn't you, if you're not represented by these articles, they're an introduction to what this experience is and why it is fascinating and important to a lot of other people.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you bring up about the 90s because I just watched, which like predated my, I mean, I was alive during Sandra Bullock's The Net, but I was a child, so I don't
You're
remember
younger
it.
than me, Andrew. Thank you.
I'm the like millennial representation here. But yeah, early 30s is kind of like an in between. You don't know exactly where you fit sometimes. But with the net, even I was thinking about like those chat room spaces, like even when Craigslist starts to kind of become popular, the advent of Grindr, even like when it comes to the difference between public kink spaces and like online kink spaces, I thought like that's a great opening in terms of, you know, what Casper, Sergio, you're both doing, but also like what this issue addresses in the first place, which is like how people get introduced to kink. Like I would assume that kink culture is now even more um visible in ways, but also in other ways harder to kind of situate like an in person or put a face to the group, if that makes sense. So like I don't know, Casper or Sergio, like how do you weigh in terms of the difference of what you're thinking with like I guess in person kink practice and then like online kink practice?
Casper, you want to go or I go?
Oh, you can go first.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, I'll start with the generational representation as well, because as you said, like we have different generations, and we can see how kinks, I mean, are evergreen, and this connects with public and online spaces. Because personally, I come from. A place where I got first introduced through online spaces, and reading Casper's piece about Tumblr, I found that was my first introduction to it too. And then it all came, I guess, to X now, where especially the feet fetish is widely diffused. Um, so from my point of view, from my perspective, it's the online before the personal space and actual experiences, and that is also, I guess, a fantasy somehow. And this is what I wanted to explore, like how media exposure also got me into the fetish, because normally it isn't something I do every time I'm hook up with somebody. So yeah, but that is, I guess, yeah, the online has helped to diffuse the concept and the discourse. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Casper.
Yeah, something that I think about often is maybe especially for younger people, whether there's such a difference between online and kind of public spaces. I think especially something I've been thinking a lot about, I guess in the vein of feet, is kind of what does it mean to have a digital footprint at this point? Considering that it affects everything from how you can socialize to the jobs that you can get to the way that you pass through the world. I come from, particularly trans and non-binary perspective in the sense of, especially for people in transition, you can often leave a digital footprint of your entire transition piece by piece
Mm,
out in what becomes a public space. And kind of what does that mean to have all of these versions of yourself existing simultaneously in a fairly democratized space? And when it comes to kink, how much distance is there from the persona that you have online and the persona you have offline? And, which one is kinkier? Are they both partaking in the same kinds of kink? To what degree? Um, something I think about is that, especially stuff like foot fetishes have kind of almost become a bit of a meme online. People talk about them so flippantly, but then when you come into the real space, there's, with partnered people in, IRL, I suppose, people can be a bit more cagey about actually practicing the things they speak about so flippantly online.
mm,
Uh, so that kind of gives a sense of a lot of freedom to kind of speak in any way you want and to engage in things without necessarily needing to feel that you're buying in completely. But at the same time, I wonder, how does that translate for people who are trying to engage in a different kind of maybe more grounded sexual practice? Um, for whom these things have a deeper meaning than a throwaway line on X or a slightly more rabid persona on Tumblr.
mm.
Um, and just kind of these different versions of self all kind of collapsing in on one, or how far apart do you hold them? Those are the thoughts that start to come into my head when talking about this stuff.
Yeah, well, and we're coming fresh off of our heated rivalry episode that, thanks to everyone, I think we're almost at 4,000 views now on YouTube. So hopefully, they cross over into this kink territory. But even using heated rivalry and those actors as an example, like it's interesting what you're saying, Casper and Sergio, because like even on TikTok, it's fascinating to see like how memes are like now pictures can be used as comments and like with these actors, there's like memes of, I don't know, someone like an animal who has like their face wide open, kind of like imitating that they want to like deep throat one of the actors. And it's like just fascinating, like whether or not, like you're saying, Casper, that translates into actual IRL experience, is definitely debatable. And I would agree that people are much freer, especially if they're anonymous online. But like, how about the American perception versus even the European perception? Like, I asked that because, Sergio and Casper are joining us from, across the waters, across the pond over here. And I feel like America still has a hang up. Like, even if you say, oh, I'm kinky, like, someone could be like, that could range from, I don't know, A to Z, right? Like, kinky could be, um, spitting in someone's mouth while kissing, and then it could go all the way to water sports or bondage, right? Like, and I feel like in America, we have not exactly the best representations of kink culture in our media. Like, 50 Shades of Grey, uh, is usually everyone's touchstone, but not necessarily like Pasolini's 120 Days of Sodom. Like, so, I mean, for some it may be, but is there a difference? Like, is American culture as up to speed when it comes to even tolerating or being open to conversations around kink in a free way compared to, say, what's happening in Europe? Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episodes, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Tukalski, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, a brief guide for busy students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student-friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading. It may be freezing here in the Northeast, but when I received my copy of the Gay and Lesbian Review, it warmed me up instantly. Their new issue is all about kink culture. Let me explain a little. I'm going to read what Jeremy C. Fox, the managing editor, has to say about this issue. He says this issue marks a bit of a departure for the Gay and Lesbian Review as we crack open the bedroom door to explore the practices and paraphilias that interest or obsess some LGBT people and the roots of their appeal. Several feature articles delve deeply into why certain kinks turn some of us on, and whether we can discern historical and aesthetic rationales behind these fixations. This magazine features articles such as The Power of the Foot. Oh, yeah, they're going there with foot kinks. Maplethorpe's Gift to America, Reclaiming the Sacred Dungeon. Tumblr was a gateway to kink, and Cruising with Boyd McDonnell. You definitely want to get your hands on the kink issue here. I have an exclusive promo code that those at the Gay and Lesbian Review have granted to you all. It is ITBR Choice. Enter it when you check out on the glreview.org, and you will get a free issue of the magazine. I hope you all enjoy your reading, and it'll definitely keep you nice and cozy. I was gonna say anyone who wants to take it. Yeah, you're fine.
Shall I go?
Yeah, that's fine, Sergio.
I'd start from my piece again, but just because one of the starting reflections that brought me to want to write a piece about it, that is the actual hook of the article, is that we were approaching the end of the year that was 2 years ago, and for the second time in consequence, Italy was at the top of the foot, like hashtag on Grindr, in Grindr Unwrapped. which is basically the Spotify Wrapped of Grindr. And that got me thinking, yeah, so what in Western, especially visual culture, that has to do with the food and how is it portrayed across the year. So I wanted to get back to the very beginning of Western art, so Greek and Roman sculpture, because it has a sculptural element, like the toes and the veins, and so. And I'm happy to say I'm proud to say that we are confirmed for the third year in a row. Italy is confirmed as the first country with the feet fetish. But yeah, that's just, of course, for speaking for my piece and well, my personal kink, let's say. And yeah, more wide, I'd say, Western culture and European culture, I guess maybe we're less used to speak about it, but maybe historically, yeah, more exposed to it. Like, I hadn't, of course, have the time to speak about, let's say, Caravaggio for the Renaissance, but his images also are uh, very strong, like from a point of view. So yeah, it's I guess it's about a little bit about exposure throughout history.
I want to answer Andrew's question, but first I want to ask Sergio a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious, do you have a theory why the foot fetish is so popular in Italy? Every year, it's more popular there than anywhere else that people are using Grinder.
Oh yeah, I've asked myself that, and I would just answer mostly maybe it's for the weather. Like we have the Mediterranean, and maybe again that's a space of exposure, like with flip flops and that. But just it's the answer I gave myself, and it's the only one that comes to my mind because uh, yeah. Otherwise, I would say yeah. Historically, we've maybe uh, been into it as a society.
I would hazard a guess that I mean, there are many other countries where people are using grinders, so this doesn't necessarily answer the question about all the rest. But I mean, I think Andrew makes a point that there is still a strain of Puritanism in American culture that doesn't exist generally in European cultures. And I would say, just quickly, and then I want to hear from Casper too. But I think I think whether you can talk about your fetish, whether it's something that you can discuss openly with friends or whomever, it's very context dependent. If you're like, all sitting around a table on a patio at a restaurant in Provincetown or Fire Island or wherever, Key West, sure, you can have that conversation with your other queer friends who maybe share that fetish or maybe make fun of you because that's your fetish and it's not theirs, but it's acceptable enough that because if they don't have that fetish, they've got a different one and you can make fun of your friend for that. But like if you're at the Thanksgiving dinner table with your family in Macon, Georgia, or Peoria, Illinois, you probably would not ever suggest to anybody that you had any kind of fetish. I mean, every family is different, and some families talk about everything, but certainly my family is not that way. And I think the majority of American families, and many friends and coworkers as well, anything that is that intimate sexually is not something that you would discuss in the United States except with your other queer friends, or maybe if they're not people who are friends, like the other queer people you met at a bar or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah, I was.
Casper has the unique experience of having lived in the UK for not quite a year, but multiple months now. But having come from the US and maybe can speak to differences that he's seen.
Yeah, which is more prudish?
Um,
No.
so I'm in the weird bubble of, or I'm in several weird bubbles. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, which
Mm,
is, I still think the polyamory capital of America. As a 20 something, it's just about impossible to do a house share without trying it, like entering somebody's messy polycule.
yeah.
So it's like, like growing up, my next door neighbors were a lesbian punk band slash roller derby team. And so it's like this environment, you're just interacting constantly with people who are very open. You'll see people wearing leather out in the streets. We have naked bike rides every year. Um, it's like I grew up and my neighbors would go to naked bike rides. So
Yeah.
like if, and so it's just that's the environment. It's very free. I can't say that's just, for all of Portland. There's also its limitations of being, very white, very, you know, very millennial in terms of its kind of age demographics of that kind of culture. And so, it's experiencing changes. There's all sorts of demographic stuff. And then popping over to Cambridge, my first thought was, oh God, this place is so straight. It was, there just wasn't the visible kind of queer representation that I was used to seeing in Portland. And knowing, Portland is an outlier amongst the United States. It's like being from San Francisco and trying to say the whole world is San Francisco over here. But it's like the first kind of queer thing I saw was a pride flag encased in glass in the King's College kind of welcome area. And I thought that, there's some kind of imagery here about a pride flag, you know, set up like a museum exhibit. It's a very welcoming college. It's very wonderful,
Yeah.
but there's not that same level of visibility. People are dressed very well, pea coats, all the whole deal. There's a you know, Church of England cathedral every 4 blocks. It's, another sort of space, but, it's like getting hate crime for being visibly queer is relatively common here, even in Cambridge. Most of the people I've had the good fortune of becoming friends with have some experience of being attacked, which is something I did not grow up with in Portland in the same way. Being a child, I suppose I'm shielded, but here also I think the Online Safety Act went into effect this year, and so you need to submit your ID to the government through a third-party service to access explicit content online, and
Oh.
it's very hit or miss what it censors. So sometimes it'll censor curse words. I have the kink issue pulled up on my computer, and I haven't had any issues with it. So it's very hit or miss, but it's a very sexless internet in that sense. Um, and so it's been quite odd. I don't really know because Cambridge doesn't speak for the whole UK. It's a bubble. It's hyper wealthy, hyper influential, very culturally dense. But it does feel like the kind of place where queer things happen behind closed doors, in the dark, semi-darkness of a stairwell, the back rooms of a, cathedral, like these sorts of very clandestine meetings. And so probably super kinky if you can just, get through that layer of scarcity, but it definitely feels like going from a jungle to a desert in terms of, you know, yeah, all the moisture getting sucked out of the air. But
It reminds me of like Cambridge and Oxford is the heartbeat of WASP culture, in my opinion. It's kind of like thinking about Princeton in New Jersey. I feel like is the same culture. Um, but I don't, well, in the sense of, yeah, are you gonna see like leather in Princeton? No. Or are you gonna see like an orgy? I mean, well, Folsom Street is also a unique aspect. But I guess like my question too is what do you all consider kink? Like, we've kept saying this word kink, but like in each of your own definitions, like what does it mean to be kinky in the first place?
I, gosh, I've been thinking a lot about that. I actually wrote a bunch about it before coming, and doing this. But I originally kind of went with the idea of any sort of non-normative sexual behavior or way of relating to your body and the bodies of others. I think it's a very interrelational force in that it kind of forces you to ask things about what pleasure means to you, receiving pleasure, giving pleasure, desiring, being desired. Um, and so, things that go beyond what are socially sanctioned. I think that makes it culturally relative, though, and always shifting. Because, I don't, am I allowed to say the phrase eating ass on this?
Yeah, yeah, you could say
Okay.
every anything you want.
I think about eating ass because that was something that I would have, put fully under kink. Um, before, and now I feel like it's become so normalized to talk about and to say that you do it and to joke about it on social media platforms to the point where it's like I don't know if I would consider it kink because at this point it's so accepted that you can be straight and eat ass, um,
Mm.
that it's fine. But then I also was thinking about like, well, is it okay for if it's okay for a straight man to eat ass, I'm assuming of a woman, is it then also okay for a woman to eat the ass of a straight man? And I was all of a sudden saying like, I don't know actually. I think there's probably a lot of people who joke about eating ass who draw the line at that. They're like, no, 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 like that's no good. And I think that kind of comes into kind of embracing ways of relating to your own body through sex and through sensation that kind of push the bounds of normal. Like if you're a straight man and you're super uncomfortable with getting your ass eaten, to do so would be kinky in my mind because it kind of pushes the realm of what is acceptable, what is allowed, how we're allowed to inhabit our bodies and those of others. Um, and so, yeah, just it being a shifting category is very exciting in that sense too, when I think about it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're suggesting that it's whatever is outside of like the heteronormative or a heterosexual coupling in their sex acts that's like on the fringes of what's not talked about or what's not the common. And I don't want to say common because that sounds, you know, like I'm making a judgment there, but like just what isn't talked about in the open, like things that, like eating ass has kind of shifted, you're saying, in terms of the respectability politics around it, but
Mhm.
like pegging is being practiced by straight couples, but like whether or not it's practiced as a majority, you know, I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, I think that's interesting.
I think it's about, the Overton window shifting over time, what is considered acceptable to do or acceptable to talk about. And there's an episode from at least 20, more probably more than 20 years ago of Sex and the City where Miranda meets a guy who wants to perform analingus on her, and she's kind of okay with that. She's a little bit creeped out by it. But then when he wants his turn, when he wants her to perform it on him, she starts to try to do it, and then it's just like, no, that's gross. And frankly, like straight men are not always the cleanest people in the world. Who knows like what she was dealing with? But I think I think before that episode, the conversation, if any conversation existed in the culture at large about analingus, was very different than it was after many people had seen that episode and than it is now. I feel like I think Casper gave an excellent definition of what kink is and what differentiates what we would consider a kink from a normative sexual practice that almost everyone performs. At least we assume almost everyone performs. Um, but I can remember too, like I had a straight guy who I was friends with in high school who back in like the late 90s was going around like whenever he saw a pretty girl saying I'd like to eat her ass. Like it became a thing where like once he was introduced to the idea, and I mean I think him saying that was partly to shock his friends and to get a laugh from them. But I think, you know, it's something that we're all a lot more familiar with now, the concept of analingus. And you know, once you're getting served ads on your social media for t-shirts that depict the act, like it's no longer niche, you know.
Mhm.
It's not some extreme activity that only real heavy like kinksters would be into. It has become pretty mainstream, I think, even within straight culture, although again that's, you know, that's dependent region to region, community to community. There's going to be some difference there. But I bet, I mean, I bet when a group of straight women get together, it's a conversation that is had, and on some occasions, like, I dated this guy who was really into that, and etc. Or I discovered that I liked that, but the guy I'm dating won't do it.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of like I'm curious about like the idea of shame with kink because I feel like, if a guy um like it's used by comedians a lot, like, oh, did she stick a finger in your ass? And it's kind of like made to be the punchline, like not about necessarily the pleasure of it. Like, what's the boundary too, like with kink culture and the idea of like those acts being shameful? Because I feel like, for a long time, even the idea of blowjobs, like, we're seen as disgusting by straight women in pop culture. But then now they're joking about like, do you spit or swallow? And I'm sure a lot of this also has to do with like what acts are popularized in pornography. Like the money shot like became everywhere. So then it was kind of like the de facto of, is this what is supposed to happen? Like, am I supposed to be choked like a porn star? I mean, I know I like offered a lot there, but like just talking maybe about shame and kink, or even, the way that pornography, I'm thinking with X, which I'm not on anymore, but I know porn is everywhere on X now. Um, like how has that impacted like thinking around kink culture? Because I'm sure like porn has definitely had something to do with either exposing people to kink culture or even kind of showing the gradations of behavior. Um, so I don't know if anyone wants to like pick that up.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA+ people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast week dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
I'll just say that I think it's worth noting that it's a very generational thing when you think about like our grandparents. They didn't have access to pornography, like my grandparents were the World War II generation. Both of my grandfathers served. And, you could get like maybe playing cards with naked ladies on them or something like that. But you couldn't get like hardcore porn depicting people actually performing sex acts on each other. So I think again, it's the Overton window shifting what is acceptable to talk about, what is acceptable to perform. And I won't name names, but I know a woman of the generation above me in my family who expressed to me that she was disgusted by the idea of fellatio. And I think probably for boomers that was not necessarily that uncommon. I mean, I think there were plenty of boomers who were also giving head, but I think if you go a generation above me, it's certainly fewer than my generation. If you go a generation above them, it's even fewer. I mean, hard to imagine either of my grandmothers doing that, but God only knows. But yeah, it's certainly it's something that exposure has changed all of our expectations, and all of us, not all of us on the earth, but all of us in this room, I assume, and many of us on the earth have seen porn that depicts stuff that maybe is more extreme than we would even be interested in doing, but the more you are exposed to it, the less it seems foreign and scary, and maybe something starts off being something that you wouldn't be inclined to do, and over time you're like, well, maybe.
Yeah, and I know we're talking specifically about um the writing in the Gay and Lesbian Review, like in a queer context, but I would assume too that there's like, how does the issue of gender come up in, and I know kink culture has so many different scholars, theories, right? It's not like a monolith, but like the way that women express or see themselves in kink culture compared to, say, you know, men, or even like how non-binary people practice kink culture. I would assume there's a spectrum too, like that women in pornography are kind of already like, there's just such a history of objectification that doesn't exist with men in pornography. So like, how free do certain people feel even expressing that they're into certain things because of what's acceptable in society?
Well, I think I'll just reconnect to your previous thoughts about kink in general. So what is kink, and how does the queer spectrum comes into it? By saying that basically I would define as you suggested, that kink is everything that is non-vanilla, sexual, not... there's a theorist that is Gail Robin, which is a telling name, and separates good and bad sex, or deviant sex as well, saying that the heteronormative sexuality is accepted because it is for done for reproduction, and so while the queer in general is mostly and comes from a space of non-penetrative sex as well. I would say, I guess we queers do more of that than hetero couples. So yeah, I think that the queer in this discourse come into this also because it subverts the gender roles as well. I guess in BDSM we have the dominatrix figure, so a woman that is actually in power. And in I was watching a video documentary, yeah, produced by James Franco. I didn't know he produced a documentary on the kink pornography producer website, like, and yeah, they were telling that it is the basically the person submitted which is in power, because with just one word, the safe word, they can end everything. So it subverts a lot. So I guess the queer comes into this discourse if we think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Casper, I was gonna ask you if, like, what's happening in terms of like imaginative kink? Because I would think like what you've looked at with Tumblr and other spaces online, like there are some people who are more just into the imaginative act of being kinky than necessarily acting it out physically. Like, is that something you've seen in these spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to the extent that you can't act anything out physically that's happening over Tumblr, we have yet to transmit sensation directly over the internet.
Mm.
Um, but, I gets me thinking a lot about gender and the kind of lines between normative and non-normative sex, and questions about who is culturally entitled to desire, who is discouraged from desiring or to and feeling desired in certain ways. And I think a lot about how Tumblr, and especially very kinky sides of Tumblr and fan fiction forums, were inhabited by young women, both straight, queer, people who would eventually discover that they're trans masculine or trans men or non-binary. Like, kind of regardless, you have this nucleus of women who are in this younger age in this space creating a lot of what we see now as kind of like that Tumblr kinky
Mm.
queer culture. Um, and it is a lot of subversion and just the idea that people, especially young women who are really, I think, pushed to be in that non-desiring role, that inactive role, to go out and to chart these, sexual and kinky imaginaries is a very radical act that I don't know if I would want to kind of make subordinate to the realm of the physical. Um, because it is like these are people who have very little agency. Most of them are fairly young. And so, there's not really an equivalent in the real world to go out and imagine these things for yourself and to go pursue them. There are cultural and legal limitations, and people might just not want to be engaging in these things at, the age of 14 when there's just so many barriers. And maybe you're like, I like imagining it because my imagination is where I am safe to imagine these things.
Mm.
You know, you don't want harm to befall you. You don't want harm to befall others. And so I think that there is a lot of power in that imagination, and
Mm.
that has to do a lot with gender and kind of when things tip into kink. Like, for example, if you're someone who is conditioned or told that you should not desire more than what someone gives you, is it kink to want more in general? To
Mm.
demand more of your sexual relationships and your sexual dynamics, even if the actual acts that are being done don't typically count as kink.
Mm, Well, and I thought it was interesting, like Sergio talked about non-vanilla, because like I think in everyday conversation, a lot of people just say like, "Oh, I'm so vanilla," or right, like kind of like reiterating what's been discussed, like what Casper you were saying in that way of describing just that normative sex act. And like, do you think that as a group, is kink culture more radical now, or has it always existed, but because of the online space, things have just gotten more visible? Like, has the foot fetish always been around? Like, has, you know, BDSM culture always been around, but it's just now like people can consider themselves part of the community because of the visibility.
There's certainly a lower barrier to entry than there used to be for a lot of kink. Like, I see Instagram ads trying to sell me leather harnesses, and it's just so readily available. Um, and in a way that it wasn't to previous generations, or even if you go back 5 to 10 years, it wasn't as easy to find some kink apparatus and kink communities as well. So obviously, everything moving online has made everything more accessible to more people. But I mean, obviously, if you go back like 200 years, there weren't probably people wearing a leather harness that was intended for a sexual purpose, but there were no doubt people who were practicing dominance and submission in sexual relationships, but also like if you go back a little over 150 years, people didn't conceive of themselves as homosexual or heterosexual because those terms didn't exist until about 1870. So, people. Uh, Society evolves, or at least changes over time. I mean, you could argue whether it's evolution or not, but things are always changing, and new ideas present themselves and then become more accessible and then more mainstream. But there 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 have always been people who were engaged in sexual play, and it would be interesting if we had the ability to know more about what people were doing 200, 300, 400 years ago, or 10,000 years ago. Like that's not the kind of thing that is typically well documented. There are diaries here and there, but we don't really know what, the 17th century ladies were doing with each other or with their male partners.
Yeah, you have to like rely on ancient pornography. Like I'm thinking of ancient Greek vases. They've shown some light into like non-procreative acts. Like there's some, anal sex things going on. But you're right. Like in ways of documenting, uh, it would be interesting to know. Um, like, does what's happening now mirror the past? But like as we're ending our time, which has just been such a fascinating conversation, is like how do you each of you like weigh in terms of like why do you think it's important to even study or talk about, write about kink culture or kink just behavior as a subject? Like what did you get out of writing your pieces for the magazine? Like, what can we learn from this deep dive that you each have done in your pieces? So, Casper, Sergio, whoever wants to start.
Always the little dance of who's going to unmute
Mhm.
first. I think for me, like, it's always hard to tell per your last question. How much is kink kind of pushing the dial forward? I think especially for me in the kind of youth online generation, everything's so drenched in irony that it can be really difficult to know what people actually believe. But it seems like, in popular culture, kink's most important export is just the idea that people deserve to feel good and, to live in their bodies and experience other people's bodies in ways that are respectful and mutually pleasurable or non-mutually if that's the kink. But that we can derive pleasure from so many aspects of the way that we inhabit the world and inhabit ourselves. And it allows us to imagine, I think, not just sex beyond our current system, but like ways of being, of finding pleasure in the everyday, kind of tying it back to is kink a practice or a culture? What does it mean to take pleasure in your community? In the feeling of sunlight on your skin, if you truly feel embodied. I think there's just so many more applications that pleasure, especially non-normative pleasure, has. And I think, anything that moves the dial forward on people's belief that that's what they deserve is to feel good, um, in ways where they also feel respected and safe is, just so valuable, even if the actual acts are not, translating in the exact same ways.
Mm, mm. Yeah, Sergio?
I absolutely do agree. Yeah, it's talk. The more you talk about it, the more well, the less shame it's around it. So I guess it's important for that and to assert pleasure that without permission or with consensual non-permission. Um, so yeah, as long as there are consenting adults, I guess we we should research as well as to have the words and for a discourse, for a wider discourse. So I guess yeah, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. And then Jeremy, I mean, what do you hope everyone gets out of reading the kink issue? Because I'm assuming you had a lot of fun putting this together.
Well, they have fun putting together every issue of the
Yes.
magazine, but this certainly was a little bit of a different experience than the forthcoming issue is on the Victorians, and there's a bit less kink in that one. I mean, it I think it's important and interesting to understand other people and to understand ourselves. And I think part of the way that we come to understand ourselves is by understanding other people's experiences better. Like we can see how we connect to their experiences or how we disconnect. Like what is different, what is the same. I mean, I think Casper's piece on young people exploring all of these different kinds of experiences virtually on Tumblr really points to how this can be worthwhile, how you can find out more about yourself through, reading slash fiction, perhaps. Um, and I think, sexuality is an important part of the experience of being alive and being human and being embodied. And hopefully for most people, it's a positive part. And kink is one aspect of that, and also something that historically has been important. In the queer community. I mean, we don't have the writer here, Matthew Bamberg, who wrote about the influence of Robert Mapplethorpe's BDSM photography on mainstream society, kind of for many people learning what BDSM was. Um, But he describes in that scenes that were taking place in gay bars in the 70s, that the kind of thing that in that setting was maybe totally normative and unremarkable, but most Americans in the 1970s had not yet experienced, and maybe didn't know existed until they saw these photographs. And I think, BDSM, piss play, which is specifically cited in the Mapplethorpe article, that's not going to be for everybody, and it doesn't need to be for everybody. I think people need to know that is something that some people enjoy, and hopefully that also gives people more. Allows people to give themselves permission to explore other modes of expressing their sexuality, and to be more comfortable with what other people are doing, and to be more comfortable with what they're doing. And one thing that I discovered in working on this issue, fielding different submissions and proposals, including some that made it in and some that didn't. And there's one piece that's going to be upcoming on our website that didn't make it into print. Um, uh, every community has different kinks. Like, if it's two cisgender men together and two cisgender women together, like obviously you have different body parts to work with. You have different opportunities to do different things to those body parts. And with trans people, sometimes it's a combination of what we expect to find on a cisgender man and what we expect to find on a cisgender woman. And also there are just elements of life experience that are different based on whether you're a gay man, a lesbian, a trans person, a non-binary person. There are different aspects of your experience that you can eroticize, and that will turn you on. So I think it's helpful to understand that kink is obviously not one size fits all. It's different for everybody, and the variety of what people are doing in their bedrooms and dungeons and various other places, college library bathrooms. The variety is much greater than you might expect based on your own experience being in one kind of body and being sexual with whomever you are sexual with.
Yeah, and I think what's so refreshing about the gay and lesbian review in general is that, you know, every piece of writing opens up the conversation, and it humanizes and like creates a sense of empathy of just understanding different practices. But, it's not saying you, the reader, you need to do this. Like, it's not a dictum, because I'm sure, right, anyone who watches this or is listening, I'm sure there's some who would be like, well, I'm not into kink behavior at all. And like, I mean, those kinds of accusations have been used to pathologize the LGBTQ community anyway. But like at the end of the day, like you're saying, it's, not just the queer community, the straight community, polyamory community, the monogamous couple, like there's such a spectrum. And I think it's just so refreshing to see like this continued urgency of just giving voice to so many different experiences, which the magazine does so wonderfully. But, I'm so happy that I was joined, with Sergio, Casper, Jeremy again. Excited for when you come back on for the Victorian issue, which, we'll have a lot to talk about. And if, Sergio, Casper, where would you like people to follow you? If you have a social media handle, you want to give any like things you want to put out there on the airwaves, now's the time. So, Sergio, where could everyone follow you?
I guess Instagram is the best way. Sergio.interdonato that's it. Name that surname. Yeah.
Good, good.
So
And Casper, where could they find you or your work?
I am very offline, strangely, for someone who just wrote so much about Tumblr, but I just have discovered Substack, and
Okay.
I am the Casper Ghostly Friend is the
Oh,
handle that they let me have. Every variation of the friendly ghost was taken, other than that one. So I will be putting stuff out on there if people are interested.
very nice, very nice. And then, of course, Jeremy, where can everyone, follow the Gay and Lesbian Review?
We're on all the social media platforms. We don't necessarily have a uniform handle on all the different platforms. Some places we're G&LR, some places it's more spelled out. But search for the Gay and Lesbian Review or the G&LR on any social media platform, and you will find us. And I personally am on every platform as just Jeremy C. Fox, all one words lumped together.
Great. So in the show notes, everyone, can find everyone's handles that they just gave. And glreview.org for the print digital subscription. ITBR choice gets you a free issue, so you could choose the kink issue as your free one. Yeah, I think that's it. Well, thank you all for such a great conversation. Just such an interesting, conversation, but just great writing, um, pieces that are here in the kink issue and continuously offering more food for thought.
Well, thank you so much for having us on the show, Andrew. And I want to thank Casper and Sergio for taking the time to talk about their work and represent the contributors to the magazine who make the whole thing possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all.
thank you.
You.